So we're going to focus on documenting, or in this sense, we're actually just going to outline and state how we're going to buy stuff, what our approach is going to be to dealing with vendors, and which potential sellers out there we're looking to work with. So our goals in conduct procurements, when we get to those processes, this happens in execution here. Our goal here is going to be to get responses, and these are going to be the proposals that we get back, in response to our RFPs. And then we got to select one of those, right? So we'll use source selection criteria to actually do that. That's what we're going to develop in this process. And we'll use that to actually select the seller and then award a contract in that process. And then you'll see when we get to control procurements, it's kind of like just making sure that they're adhering to the letter of the contract. And you see the procurements presents opportunities for significant financial and liability risk. All right, so it can be positive, it can be negative, and it's sort of tied in with that previous process group, with the risk knowledge area, I should say, not process group, but knowledge area. So these are the inputs that we'll be looking at. Now we're going to be looking at the business case again, because that will outline how we're going to make purchases and who we would be working with and what types of companies we would be looking to partner with, depending on what our goals are, and then how we intend to sustain the benefits. After the objective of this project is achieved, how will we roll it into operations, and how will the business be able to continually take advantage and exploit the opportunities that come from achieving this goal? Whatever it is that we're doing in our projects, right? There should be some benefit, and then how do we sustain that? So the management plan will take that into account. We'll take that project management plan, we'll look at these documents, EFs and OPAs. So you're seeing that as sort of a theme. We're usually taking EFs and OPAs into account when we're planning. Same tools and techniques we've been seeing. So we'll dive into those. And then you see that we have multiple outputs here. We get the plan, the strategy, the bid documents. So we touched on these earlier. We're going to deep dive into each of these. So let's get to it. The key output here is the plan, right? And it does define how we will complete purchases and integrate those with project work, because that could be third-party labor, could be materials, could be machines, could be partnering with another company. We get make or buy decisions. Now watch, let me back it up a couple slides here. You see how we have make or buy analysis? Always remember the analysis. You're doing something, tool and technique, action, activity. Make or buy decision, outcome, output. All right, the decision, documented or not, would be an output, right? So a little more wordplay. Hopefully it helps you sort of start to remember how to decipher between the two. So, okay, we get the make or buy decisions. These are the outputs. All right, should we do it in-house? Should we outsource it? Here's a couple examples in terms of the delivery methods and contract types. We'll get the bid documents. In the bid documents, you want to memorize these, at least the acronyms, because sometimes on the exam, PMI will use RFI, RFP, RFQ, right? And just for PMI, RFQ is request for quote, which is the same as an IFB, invitation for bid, where some folks, RFQ is request for qualifications. So just, note that it's a little bit different for PMI. That RFQ that we know is almost like the RFI. Yeah, here, you see it here. For PMI, at least. All right, so those are the bid documents. We also get a procurement statement of work. All right, if we're going to farm out some of the work that we have on our project, then we need to have one of these. So we can go out and get some folks to come in and complete their portion. We'll also get source selection criteria. It's another output, right? And this is how we determine. So think of it like this. This is how you as an individual will make a large purchase, an appliance or a vehicle. All right, we'll think about warranty, and we'll think about, do they have some like proprietary technology or information, and what's the past performance and what do people say? And these are the same types of examples you'll see PMI describing that you're doing with a team to determine if if a vendor is suitable, and they'll ask you, which of the following tools and techniques are being utilized, and it's source selection criteria. Like, how are we gonna evaluate the proposals and the sellers? Right. We get independent cost estimates, and this may be tied in to the charter in terms of the level of authority that a project manager has. Can a PM just make a purchase, or must they go out and produce some independent cost estimates? A lot of government workers always have to go out and get independent cost estimates before they, even if they've had a bidders conference and they've gone through the proposal process, then they still need to go out and get one more sort of just quote, so that's the independent cost estimate here. Can be done internally or by an outside estimator. All right, and then as an input, so those are all the outputs. In order to get there, we would take business documents that would align our strategy with the organizational strategic plan. All right, so we'll look at assumptions based on the business case. We'll align it with what's in our project plans in terms of the schedule, saying this is how we were going to do the work. So we should order the materials, or no, we should just pay the vendor and pay them to order the materials as well. Like, that strategy is going to be outlined here. And you can see how some of the other documents may be utilized. And this is true on our projects. Sometimes when we farm out work, we'll actually just, take a document, exhibit A, exhibit B, or, refer to this. And that's what we're seeing here, a milestone list or a traceability matrix, or, resource requirements. We may use some of these documents to define the details. We'll also take OPAs. And for OPAs, this could be, they have the pre-approved seller list, right? A lot of companies have a preferred vendor or seller list. So that's what an OPA could be here, right? Or the fact that you might have to go through procurement to get it, maybe, anything 50K and under, you can use the company card, but over, you've got to go and get approval, things like that. The different contract types. And we'll use contract types to shift risk. So we're going to talk about these contract types coming up, but this is one process where you'll get a lot of questions about, is this document an OPA or not, right? Because they're, they'll allude to a particular contract, and you'll have to, somewhere in the paragraph, recognize it. Was this just a template contract that was being modified? And so then, yes, it was an OPA. Or was this a contract that your client required you to use, which now that becomes an EEF to you, right? So these things can shift back and forth. Can you see that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the last comment you made, it becomes an EEF to you at the time, but then as soon as you have that in hand, it becomes an OPA for a future project, right?
It can be, absolutely. Absolutely not. So it's kind of like this. You may have a contract type that another company utilized, but we don't always save those as templates. We don't always say we like these ones and we'll keep them and we'll utilize them. The knowledge of the project, if we've done a lessons learned or something, yeah, that becomes the OPA. So for the exam, they're going to just be very specific, right? I'm nitpicking a little bit just because it's for the exam's sake. Okay, and now let's talk about the contracts types, right? There's 3 types: fixed price, cost reimbursable, time and materials. I'll start here and work backwards for these 3 slides. All right. So time, materials, hourly contracts. I think we're familiar with these. Even if it contains not to exceed type clause, this contract is still most risky to the buyer. So you want to note this. The risk sits with the buyer in this types of contract. Okay. Then we have cost reimbursable contracts. The risk also sits with the buyer here. Right, so you need to know that for the exam. Risk is with the buyer on these contracts. So you have the cost plus fixed fee, cost plus incentive fee, cost plus award fee. And then you have something called CPPC. It's not on here, but cost plus percentage of cost. It's not in the PMBOK because it's not allowed on federal procurements, but it is still a viable contract. And the PMBOK, PMI reserves the right to teach you on stuff that's not in the PMBOK. And so sometimes you'll see this on exam. So I just want to expose you to this one too. So that's a cost plus percentage of cost. So let me talk about these 4 types. The cost plus percentage of cost, pretty straightforward, exactly what it sounds like. This is when you pay a vendor for the cost of the materials, and then they make a percentage of whatever that is, right? So, we'll do all the labor, but you'll procure your materials through us, and then your labor cost will be whatever the percentage of that is. And you can see why that's not allowed in federal procurements, because now I, as your vendor, my incentive is to make you spend more and more and more because I'm making a percentage off of every dollar that you spend. So not allowed in federal procurements, but used a lot in plenty of other fields, and it will show up on exam. So that's CPPC, cost plus percentage cost. Okay. Now we have cost plus fixed fee, probably the most standard type contract, right? It's like you pay the cost of any of the materials and a fixed fee for the labor. So this would be, if we relate it to our personal lives, this would be like you hiring a carpenter to hang some cabinets for you. You'll pay for the cost of the materials, whether it's, $20,000, exotic wood cabinets or $5,000 wood cabinets. You're going to pay a fixed fee for the labor to hang them. It's going to cost you the same, right? Then you have the cost plus incentive fee. At least here in California, these are popular with the Department of Transportation. Any of the roadworks projects where they're always about get it done as fast as possible. So they pay for like all the concrete, all the the asphalt, the rebar, all that, and then they pay that contractor an incentive to get it done, within a specific time. Do you guys remember the movie Speed, with Keanu Reeves? So that was based on the '94 Irvine earthquake that some people know. That I don't know if you guys know. That's actually based on the earthquake in Irvine '94. So. And I lived maybe 60 miles east of that at the time. And they had a contract that they paid the contractor $1 million for every day that they got the project done ahead of schedule. And that contractor ran rolling 8-hour shifts, and they worked 24 hours around the clock. And they got it done they got it done like 30 days ahead and ended up making $31 million additional. And that was like a big deal in the state here because, we'll never do that contract again. And then when Governor Schwarzenegger was our governor, we had a part of the maze. They call it the maze, all these freeways that feed into the Bay Bridge to get into San Francisco. A truck got into an accident, caught fire, burned a section. They did the same thing. And again, that contractor finished with that incentive, finished ahead of schedule, made an additional like $18 million. And so, the very contracts come up, but so usually the incentives, the KPIs are very specific, right? Very objective. Versus the cost plus award fee, more subjective in the KPIs. You're not really sure if you're going to get it. I would relate this to in our personal lives. You go to a restaurant and you pay a cost of the meal, and then you award the waiter or waitress some fee based on how you feel the service. Was it good or not type deal, right? So those are the cost reimbursables.
So that the award is not predetermined and not predefined.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So it's I'm not as familiar with this contract. What I know about it is this. This is what I've learned about this contract. There was a painting that was done, and the contractor was worded this way: that person paid for the oil paintings and the canvas and the material and all that, right? Because the artist didn't want to bear the burden of all those materials. And then the fee, like the amount that would be paid for that artist's work, was to be determined by the buyer. And the buyer would, in each of those contracts, the buyer would get to choose one way, and you'd have to state it. And so they had a buyer that said, if my son walks in and says that, hey, this is a cool painting, I'll pay X amount. If he ignores it, then I'll pay Y amount. All right. And so, to me, that seems pretty objective. That seems like an incentive fee, but you know, take that as you may. That's any of you familiar with the award, with that award fee, cost plus award? Yeah, I'm not. I'm only familiar with the first three. So you know, more subjective though. Just kind of like, you know, hey, if they think, what I interpret from that is, if they think it's really good, you'll get more money. If they think it's not that good, you'll get less money. But that's pretty vague. So you can't call it an incentive. You can only call it an award, because, you know, it's sort of like there's no incentive there. You're going to get what you're going to get. It's like a tip. That's why when I liken it from commercial to personal, I use that example. Is like, you know, if you go to an award, if you go to some restaurant, no waiter or waitress knows what they're going to be awarded. The exam, the way you see these questions, they're pretty straightforward. PMI is not trying to trick you. They just want to see, do you know what a cost plus incentive fee is? So they'll be pretty explicit about the fact that you have a contract, and if you satisfy some other requirements, you will receive additional money or additional compensation, you know, based upon, you know, your performance. They'll be pretty explicit, and they'll say, what type of contract is this? All right, that's an incentive fee. For the award fee, they'll be pretty explicit about the fact that it's subjective and that it could range, and, you know, so they're not really trying to trick you. They're just trying to see if you can remember the fact that, you know, predefined, like this is outlined in the contract. Here, you don't really know. It's subjective. The fixed fee, pretty straightforward. And don't forget the cost plus percentage of cost. That's going to come up as well. All right, you're paying just a percentage of whatever the materials and supplies are that you're buying. The other times you see these questions on the exam, they just straight out tell you, you're a project manager for XYZ company, and your company is under a cost plus incentive fee type contract. All right, so when they're asking you about them, they're pretty explicit about, you know, what it is. And then here's the fixed price contracts: firm fixed price incentive fee, and fixed price with economic price adjustment. So firm fixed price is, you know, I'm going to pay you, you know, $300 to paint this room. All right, that includes materials, supplies, labors. You know, I pay you a fee, you come in and do it. So that's pretty straightforward. Fixed price incentive fee, where now the fixed price is the labor, and the incentive fee is to keep costs down. So there's there's a contract that the federal government uses. They're called point of total assumption contracts. You guys familiar with those? It's at a point where there's cost savings. There's a predetermined cost ceiling. There's a share ratio. And after we hit what the total cost, what the desired costs are going to be, the target cost, then we start sharing, you know, in the cost. So it's an incentive for the seller to keep costs down, because they'll actually pay in it. So let's jump into each of these. But the risk is on the seller here, right? First two types of contracts.
CJ, what you just described though, wouldn't that be a cost plus incentive fee rather than a fixed price incentive fee?
No, because the price here, the fixed price is the labor, and the incentive fee is to keep costs down. And so there's a sharing in the cost. Whereas in a cost plus, you know, you pay the cost. It's kind of like this. When you see it, the cost plus, you don't know, there's no sharing in that, right? You're paying all the costs, and you're already paying the fixed fee. So it's cost plus fixed fee. Whereas here, I'm paying a fixed fee just for your labor, and then there's an incentive on the cost to keep it down.
Okay, I'm thinking of it a little differently. I've had cost plus contracts where if you exceed the initial estimate in cost, you share in those additional costs with the buyer at a predetermined ratio. So if I think the costs are going to be $100 million, and costs end up being 110, that additional 10, we share in those costs at some predetermined ratio as well on the cost plus side.
Okay. Do you have a ceiling price?
Not on cost plus, no.
And if you save money, is there a ratio? Like, for instance, if your costs come in at 90 million, do you get a stake in that $10 million that you saved?
Yes.
Oh, that's well, The
I
only
guess
thing is the ceiling price. The ceiling price is where you get the point of total assumption. So they're very similar contracts. I mean,
okay.
yeah.
Because I guess the only difference between cost plus and fixed price is fixed price will be paid regardless.
Right.
Cost plus will only be paid your costs up to a certain amount that you predetermine.
So it'll look something like this. If let's say we have a target cost of 1 million, okay, and we have a target fee, and now you're going to pay me. Here's the fixed price, all right? You're going to pay me 200 grand to do the work, right? So that means that the target price equals 1.2 million. Okay. And then now you're asking me to do this work that I'm going to charge you 200 grand to do, and nobody else can do it except me. It's usually it's usually reserved in these types of deals. There's a very small amount of people that can do it, and it's work that's not done all the time. So we're sort of embarking on this journey together for the first time. So you're calling me in as the expert, and I'm telling you that I think it's going to be $1 million of cost, but I'm not sure. But we could have overages of 30%. And so we agree that, okay, no more than 30%, that's the cap. And so like it could be more than that. It could be 80%. And then that means that our ceiling price would be 2 million, right? But since we're going to do a 30% cap, another 300,000 overage, now that makes our ceiling price 1.5 million. Okay. You guys follow me so far? Okay. So now we have a share ratio, and we say, okay, well, somewhere along the line between this 1.2 and 1.5, we'll have a share ratio. Let's call it an 80-20. Let's say that the buyer will pay 80% for the buyer, and the seller will pay 20%. Mm-hmm. Okay, whatever that may be. Okay. And so the way you find the point of total assumption is you take the ceiling price, 1.5 million, minus the target price, 1.22 million, right? So ceiling price minus target price, right? And then you multiply that
by your 80-20
by the buyer's share ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So ceiling, let me do this a little more. Let me get my pen. We would do ceiling price minus target price, whoops, in parentheses, that times the buyer's share ratio, which in this case is 80%. All right, I'm just going to write the buyer's share ratio. Okay, and then that whole thing plus your target cost. Oh, will I get the last C in there? Target cost? No, probably won't let me do it. See, there we go. So sorry, that's kind of ugly, but ceiling price minus target price. So 1.5 minus 1.2 leaves me 300,000 times the buyer share ratio, 0.8. That gives me 300,000 divided by 0.8 would be what? 0.3875, because 3 divided by 8 is that, right? So that means 300 and right? Is that right?
No, wouldn't you multiply 0.8 times the 300,000 to get the buyer's share?
Yes.
So 240,000, that piece would be, right? So you have 300,000 times 0.8.
Times 0.8. You're right, 240,000. Thank you. 240,000 plus your total cost, which is 1 million. That means that 1,240,000, the point of total assumption is reached. Now, here's what that means. That means that as a buyer, I pay all the cost up to $1 million, right? I'm not talking about the $200,000 that I pay you, but I have $2 million in costs. I've paid it all myself, right? From 1 million to 1.2 million or 2,400,000, I've paid 80% of that, and you've paid 20% of that, right? So that 240,000, you've ended up paying 48,000, and I paid whatever out of that, right? And then now from that point moving forward, from 1.24 all the way to 1.5, you as the seller now will pay for all of the costs by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what really happens is the share ratio and the ceiling price become the negotiation tools, because we'll be upfront about what the cost is going to be, $200,000 for me to do it. We'll be upfront about what we think the costs are going to be, but then in the overages, if I change my ceiling price to 2 million, because I believe that we might have 80% in overages, right? So now the ceiling price becomes 1.8. That means that we would have 80% of 800,000, which would be 640,000. That's where we reach the point of total assumption, 1,640,000. So that's where, so that type of contract, that's where the incentive fee is to keep costs down. And then on the flip side, if I keep your costs under $1 million, and this is where it's similar, Ryan, same thing, that share ratio comes in, and we get to get some of that, money, 20% of that. So
CJ, this registry, the opportunity would be 20% times the $300,000. So
yes.
1,000.
Okay. Well, I should say this. You would need to have done qualitative analysis first. You would need to have just say, what's the probability that we'll actually go over? And it could be 50%. And then if so, what's the impact? And then we'll say the impact is $300,000. We won't use this 20%. We would use the $300,000, and then it would be 100, right? And then we would just do 50 times 50%.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. If it could only be that easy. Okay, so that's the fixed price incentive fee type contract, the point of total assumption. Note this formula. It comes up every so often, right? It's one of these things that, like, look, if one of you gets it on the exam, you might, there's 4 of you on the call, maybe one of you might get this exam. It's an obscure question, but I just want you to know it. You do see it, and it's a contract that's used. Okay, so we got those. We got cost reimbursable, time and materials, pretty straightforward. That's your hourly. And remember, we use contract types to shift risk. That might be a question on the exam. The whole idea is that if I'm the buyer, I want to move you from time and materials or from cost reimbursable over to fixed price. And if I'm a seller, I want to move you from fixed price over to cost reimbursable or time and materials. All right, we see that expert judgment would be a tool and a technique to getting to that point. So that's where you make or buy decisions. Should we do it in-house or should we outsource it? And we'll use these analytical techniques like return on investment, the net present value. Have we gotten to the formula of net present value yet? I don't think we did that. Let's add that in. So present value equals 1 plus the interest rate to the nth period. Okay, and then NPV, net present value, equals the sum of your present values minus your initial investment or your upfront costs. So let me highlight this. Let's say you have a project and it cost you $10,000 and you're going to make $2,500 a year for 5 years. Okay. If we do payback period, using that, our payback period would be 4 years, right? We take a project, it costs us 10 grand now, we're gonna get 2,500 a year for 5 years. We'll make our money back after year 4. That'll be the payback period. Your return on investment would be 125%, right? We're gonna get 5 25K payments for 10K, 10 or 20, 2.5, right? 2,500, and we're getting 10K, so 125%. Now the discounted cash flow would say this. Okay, let's say our interest rate, inflation is like usually about 5%. So let's use that as our interest rate. So present value equals, and I'm sorry, future value. I missed the whole little piece there. Present value equals future value times. Let me put that in there. I could say times future value. Okay. So if inflation is 5%, then I'll do 1 plus 5%, 1.05 in year one. So to the first power is still 1.05. And I'll multiply that by 2,500 and I would get a number. Okay. If I want to know what that 2,500 is going to be in year 5, then I would do 2,500 times 1.05 to the 5th, right? Now, if I want to find my net present value, then I'll take 2,500 times 1.05 plus 2,500 times 1.05 squared plus 2,500 times 1.5 to the 3rd, so on and so forth, however many periods. I'll add all those numbers together, and then I'll subtract out my upfront investment, that $10,000, and then it'll tell me what the net present value of that project really is. All right, so
CJ, wouldn't that equation be future value equals 1 plus I to the n times present value? Wouldn't your PV and FV be switched?
No, future value equals present value.
Because if you have $2,500 today, what would that $2,500 be in the future 5 years from now?
I think you're right. I tried to add it in. You're right. I tried to fix this little thing and I messed it all up. Thank you. So it's really, all right, let's do this. Let's get this all out and let's start it back up. Okay, start this. Okay. Is it showing up yet? No. Present value equals value divided by 1 plus I to the nth period, and future value equals present value times 1 plus I, right? Just the inverse to the n. Thank you, Ryan. These are correct. I don't know if I wrote it right the first time, but this is what it is. Present value equals future value divided by 1 plus I to the nth period. And then the inversely, future value equals present value times 1 plus I to the nth period. Gotta have some numbers guy on here keeping me in check. All right, so that's how you find the present value, and then I gave you the net present value. And then to find the internal rate of return, that's not on this, that's not a bullet on here, but PMI won't ask you to compute IRR because it's a complex formula and not enough space for you to actually do it, right? This is a function in Excel, but once you find the net present value, then you set it to 0 and you solve for I, and that's how you find the internal rate of return, right? So PMI they won't ask you to compute it, but they might describe the fact that you're a project manager for XYZ company. You and your team have been working to find the present values and subsequently the net present value of your project. You have now decided to set that to 0 and solve for the interest rate. Which of the following financial analytical techniques are you employing? And it'll say A, PV, B, NPV, C, benefit cost analysis, D, internal rate of return. All right, so it's IRR. They might just describe it and ask you to pick it out. All right, so that's how we find internal rate of return. We set the NPV to 0, and then we solve for I. Solve for the interest rate. Oh, my dyslexia is really coming out in here. All right. All right, so those are the tools and techniques. We use make or buy decisions with some of these financial analytical techniques. We'll use source selection methods.